in an interrogation. A police officer is sitting across from Maushami and asking her questions about a homicide scene. Maushami, the prime suspect, was found alone with the body, but the police officer cannot get a straight answer from her as something else dements Maushami's mind. As she restlessly looks around, Maushami disregards everything the police officer says, mentioning some spiritual creature is out to get her, while the interrogating police officer inside has little to say about this supposed evil spirit. The cops in the other room share a laugh as they hear mention of the supernatural as a scapegoat. One of the cops is skeptical that Maushami is lying, but the cop in the middle of the trio brings forth his misogyny out in the open, as he generalizes women to be crazed maniacs. Back inside the room, Maushami feels her story is also outrageous, but decides to push it further. Fear pushes her to convince the officer in front of her, as she tries to improve her reputation by explaining her brilliance as a top college student applying for a PhD. However, the police officer instead thinks that some medicine being taken by Maushami might be responsible for her manic delusion, but Maushami insists. The two are in constant conflict as the cops do not believe her story, trying to get her to confess. However, their persistence yields nothing, as Maushami once again mentions a supernatural force that is after her, specifically the deceased. Before the interrogation, a rainy night pursues and worsens the gloomy atmosphere in Maushami's apartment, with pills and an empty bottle of an alcoholic beverage filling up the majority of her bedside table. Maushami is dealing with the resultant grief from her sister Sneha's demise in the worst way possible. Texts from people offering their condolences do nothing but fuel the pain already in her heart. As she lay in her bed doing nothing, a phone call disturbs her moment of solitude. She picks up only to hear her sister's voice, immediately startling her into getting up. At first, shock turns into anger, with Maushami hurling accusations that the person on the other side is a thief. However, the conversation continues while the person on the other side insists they are Sneha. Maushami cuts the call in a fit of rage, but suddenly, her solitude within the confines of her bedroom is disturbed by a blurred creature walking on the walls. After a brief moment, the phone rings again, and the same person calls her from her sister's number. Maushami threatens to call the police on the caller. Still, the caller, on the other side, moves the conversation onto Sneha's passing, blaming Maushami for being negligent, while the two filmed a TikTok. Maushami realizes that this person talking to her knows too much to be some random individual. Immediately after, the sister leaves a hint, telling Maushami she is in her usual hiding place. Maushami slowly lets go of the phone from her hands. She remembers that her sister would always hide under the bed. Now suspecting some supernatural presence in the room, she gingerly gets off the bed to check underneath. Maushami looks, but nothing is underneath, and she fails to notice that someone is standing right behind her. She looks out the window, but her attention is drawn towards the phonograph that suddenly starts playing. She takes her time to walk towards and shut the record player off, now seemingly more frightened by what is happening to her. The moment she shuts the player down, suddenly, a woman's body appears in the window behind her. Maushami does not notice anything strange until lightning strikes again, and she sees a woman right before her. Her first instinct is to reach out to who she assumes to be her sister. While she hesitates, Maushami's attention is drawn away from the woman in front of her by her sister's voice on the radio. She looks back to see the woman with her now gone, but eventually starts hearing more and more voices of her sister. Distraught, she falls back into her bed. The voices become unbearable for her until, eventually, they all stop. Slightly confused, Maushami reaches for the silent radio to turn it off. As her hand barely reaches for the button, she is interrupted by the spirit in her sister's mangled body revealing itself to her this time, forcing out a shriek from unsuspecting Maushami. A year has passed since Maushami experienced this paranormal encounter. She is moving into a fancy, high-rise apartment with her best friend. Before settling for the estate presented to them, they take a tour, joke around, and decide upon their respective rooms. Eventually, they sit together on a bed, taking in their surroundings. The realtor brags about his capabilities as an agent for the two, but the women just want him out so that they can begin living their city life. After the realtor's exit, they sit together and talk about the new life before them in Mumbai. With this lavish apartment at their disposal, the two plan on having a housewarming party to mark their move. The women talk and gossip about their future in the city before the two cut it short and race toward the bathroom together. Having lost said race, Maushami stands alone in the corridor. Suddenly, a door from across the corridor creaks open, ushering in an eerie feeling that Maushami had not felt since her sister's passing. Without any warning, the lights shut down, but lightning flickers in the room across the corridor. While Maushami checks to find no one there, even she knows that she is not alone once again. After a brief moment, she ends up in the walk-in closet, looking for the spirit or whoever was there with her. By this point, the lights in the house usually start working, so Maushimi relaxes and rests by the clothes rack on one side of the room. However, while she still does not feel completely safe, bloodied hands reach out from behind the rack and grasp onto each of her shoulders. Maushimi shrieks and runs out to the corridor, which is once again darkened with only the flickering lightning showing the surroundings. The creature's shadow is first visible across the corridor, but it spares no time to bend its body like a contortionist and crawl over to Maushimi. The poor woman is practically screaming for help as her sister's body crawls around the ceiling and the floor, teleporting between the two, chasing after Maushimi. Suddenly, the bathroom door opens, and everything returns to how it was when Maushimi's best friend leaps out to embrace her. Maushimi reciprocates, but is still clearly traumatized as her mistake from the past comes back to haunt her. Perhaps a part of her still feels guilty about Sneha's demise. The two roommates sit together to calm down. Maushimi looks like she saw a ghost, but does not talk about her encounter at all. They share a moment before the bell interrupts them. Outside await a few of their friends with drinks and pizza. Perhaps the perfect opportunity for Maushimi to distract herself from what haunts her. The group enjoys their time together in the jacuzzi, while Maushimi and another friend, Amy, pour themselves drinks inside. Amy talks about some anecdotes from college and flirts with her, after which the two drink champagne together. As the housewarming party progresses, Maushimi's best friend sets her up with Amy, as they both have chemistry and are interested in each other. They make up some excuse and eventually find themselves in Maushimi's bedroom. The two of them decide to try and get frisky, but their moment of romance ends when the rain outside gets worse and turns into another lightning storm. Maushimi starts hearing murmurs, suddenly getting agitated as her attention is drawn to the windows looming over the city. While nothing seems unusual for Amy, Maushimi feels immensely threatened until the spirit abruptly returns outside the window. Seeing the ghost again, she screams restlessly, prompting Amy to leave the room and get help for the supposedly delusional girl having a manic episode in the bedroom. Upon hearing this, Maushimi's best friends walk in to find her alone in the room amid her episode. While nothing seems out of the ordinary anymore, Maushimi calms down briefly as she lies against the back of the bed frame to talk with her friend. This time, she wants to share what is happening to her, but her details are brushed off as manic delusions stemming from year-old grief. Neither side yields to the other, so they both decide to sleep in the bed for the night. Fast forward to the interrogation room, where the swirling of a spoon in a teacup bothers Maushimi immensely. Two of the cops outside the room talk about the supernatural, but while one is adamant about their existence, the other cannot accept it, as he thinks the woman is trying to plead by blaming a ghost for her crimes. In the room, the officer asks Maushimi to confess by asking several loaded questions. She does not yield, but instead recalls the day of her best friend's demise. It was a typical morning during that forsaken day. While they had gone to bed together, Maushimi found her best friend nowhere in the house, until she eventually saw someone standing on the balcony. There she was, looking into the distance. However, despite Maushimi constantly calling out to her, the inevitable was already set in stone. With an invisible force culprit, Maushimi saw her best friend's body fling off the balcony, crashing down onto the street, causing a bloody splatter. Speechless at first, Maushimi eventually cries out into the distance, until her moment of grief for her sudden loss is interrupted by a hand on her arm. The spirit has come to greet her in person. Fast forward to the interrogation room. Without much more evidence in her favor, Maushimi's case looks worse and worse as the officer decides to pull out a photograph of a girl. When asked to identify it, Maushimi claims it is the creature haunting her in the apartment building. Without any warning, the officer explains that she cannot use this woman as a scapegoat, as she is the daughter of the apartment owner who passed away a year prior. One of the cops in the other room starts explaining how paranormal entities attach themselves to someone without anyone else seeing the victim being haunted. With the spirits forever attached, Maushimi has reached the point where they will never leave her and force isolation on her by removing anyone who tries to stay by her side. With this explanation out in the open, the lights in the room suddenly start to flicker. Everyone involved with the interrogation seems unsuspecting, but Maushimi demands to be released. Without any explanation for the light flickering, everyone begins to panic. But something worse happens to Maushimi. A new spirit, completely invisible to everyone else, appears behind the officer in the interrogation room. Maushimi rushes towards the corner of the room, demanding to be let out, but her demands are met with accusations from the officer. The cops in the other room feel bothered by the situation. One of them finally explains that the worst has arrived, and now it is time for Maushimi to serve as a vessel. Suddenly, The frantic woman quiets down, turning around to reveal that she has now been possessed. The officer sees a smiling Maushami before her face morphs into one similar to the creatures that haunted her before. The rest of the cops in the other room notice that the interrogation room is no longer safe, so they rush to the door to let the officer out. Their attempts seem futile, as the last thing they hear from the room is a shriek, followed by Sneha's voice from an audio tape recorder, mentioning her favorite hiding spot one last time.